Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Supercoach Insider podcast. My name is Wiz, here talking Sydney Swans with Kai from the KB Sports Fantasy Podcast. How are you, mate?
I'm good. Yourself?
Shane, always good to talk footy and Supercoach, and it's great to have you on the show. I know you're a very passionate Swans man, so I'm sure you've got a lot to say about them, and hopefully just improve that one extra spot on what they did last season.
Yep. All it was probably 3 quarters, and that was pretty much just the difference between looking at potentially even top 8 performance now and actually the full glory of it all.
Yeah. All right, but before we jump into the more about the Sydney Swans today, as always, check us out on all our social media platforms, in particular the YouTube, Spotify. Get in contact with us via X, Supercoach Insider 100 and Swizz 26. How can the good folk out there find you, Kai?
You can find me at KB Sports Fantasy across YouTube, Twitter, and also on Spotify. And also you can see a lot of my rants and everything about sports in Australia and across the globe on my actual personal Twitter of Kai Broom 35 itself.
Beautiful. All right, so as we know, the Swans finishing runners up to the Lions last year, going to have a tough fixture because of where they finished on the ladder. They were probably the standout team for most of the year. Very annoying that they do have that round 0 opening match, but that's the whole idea of the opening round, apparently, for the northern teams. So do knock off the Swans there in the SCG in round 0. Tough first up, then the proper matches, the grand final rematch, then travel over the Fremantle before that round 3 bye. Their byes are round 3 and 14. At least the round 14 bye is the second, no, maybe the middle bye this year, because I think it's spread out over 5 byes in the middle. So the if you are looking at maybe the premium or 2 Swans players on the run home, you can get them in, and after that they've had their bye. So that is one positive. Of those double games, we've got the doubles with the grand final rematch against Brisbane, Fremantle, who were meant to be improving, Port, who were up there last year. Probably on the only one on the real easy side is probably North Melbourne. We know they are improving too. So it's going to be a tough little run for the Swans, but if they play like they did last year, they are definitely good enough. Thoughts, mate?
Yeah, I think looking through the first 5 games as a Swans fan, 3-2, 4-1, you're pretty happy sitting through there. I think I looked as well at the next 5 after that, and I thought that's where they could really start to make their mark. I think they had Gold Coast, in the round 7,
Yes.
GWS that game, Essendon and Carlton. That could be another 4-1 stretch, and suddenly you're looking at 10-3 or 8-2 or 7-3 through the first 10 games, and suddenly that pretty much sets up the season itself to have a chance at top 4 or to
Yeah,
6 to 8.
I really like their period straight actually after that Blues run, because they played the D's, the Crows at home, and then the Tigers away. So leading into their bye, they actually have some really juicy games too. So it's a little bit frustrating because you'd prefer it coming out of their bye. But if there's a sort of a player, and especially a premium player, that you might want as maybe a vice captain or a captain option, the Swans might be somebody who can actually get you through that bye period.
Yeah, I think just looking quickly here, their fixture 6 weeks in and around that bye, it looks pretty fine outside of 1 or 2. The GWS fixture is probably the tough one on round 8 and 20. Outside of that, it looks pretty chill. There's only maybe 1 or 2 tough fixtures in that Fremantle, I would say. But aside from that, they have it's that run home of Brisbane and Geelong that really you might want to potentially jump off the Swans at that point, but then they have West Coast round 24, so it's this juggling of playing the easy sides, the easy 3, I guess, and trying to match the fixtures there.
Yeah, for sure. And in regards to their best 2022 or 23, I haven't altered too much compared to their grand final side. So we've got Rampy, McCartan, Lloyd, Blakey, Melican. I've put Roberts at half back, Florent, Warner, Goulden, Adams, McDonald, Jordan, Haywood, Amati, Papley, Grundy, Heaney, and Rowbottom as the followers, and then interchange Cunningham. The Mills comes back in, obviously missing the grand final. McInerney and McLean with the sub. Braden Campbell. I think they're probably the unlucky ones there is Fox. in particular, and there's a couple other kids that we'll be talking about during the Supercoach targets who probably could have even made that if they, I know, well, like I say, Toll, he's been struggling with a little bit of an injury. Caden Cleary was on the emergency list for the grand final. So they've got a bit of depth there. And yeah, you know that, like all teams, is going to cop injuries through the preseason and early rounds. So, they do have players ready to put their hand up if need be.
Yep.
So anything there, mate, you'd happily change, or you're pretty happy with how that?
I think it all comes down to who do they view over the top of Adams, Sheldrick and Cleary for that sort of half forward, small forward spot. I mean, you could easily chuck as well one of the sort of flankers that they seem to have, and that was something that we'll probably get into more with talking about Dean Cox itself, and his sort of opening press conference has been this sort of mantra of speed and contested ball, and I think that could open the door for a guy like Caden Cleary, Sheldrick as well, to come in and cement their spot. And where does Mills play is probably the big opening round question, but I guess that opening round probably helps us out a lot with all these questions there that need to be answered.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously the big change there, which I didn't mention as you have, is out Horse and in Cox. So it's obviously it will be a massive change. How massive early does Cox keep things simple? Does he or similar? Does he kind of start to already work his own stamp on it? So that'll be we were not going to probably get to see that, and probably not properly until. I think usually these things kind of take 12 months. They don't like to make wholesale changes straight away. They did have their 2K time trial the other day, which then became into a double 2K time trial, which I thought was pretty brutal. But yeah, maybe he's already stamping his authority there and getting the boys right for that round 0 match.
Yep, that was definitely an interesting double 2K, I reckon, and it showed quite a lot of interesting, I think, Supercoach implications.
It sure did. When Supercoach Gold first opened, before I even looked at the buys, I was saying to Ben I had a lot of Lions and Swans players in, and then started to have to alter it because I was like, I can't really have that many players missing in I think round 3. So did start to change it, but yeah, there's some players on this list that I do really like, and there's a few others that we will talk about. But we'll kick off with Matt Roberts. It was a brilliant rookie for us last year. For those who especially held him through those buys, I know he had sort of that dip because he had that 5 game, and people like myself did jump off. And then his finish of the season was ridiculous. So from round 18 onwards, he went 95, 114, 161, 85, 92, 112, and 118, which is just absolutely massive for a guy that we can get for a defender. What are your thoughts on Matty Roberts, mate?
The interesting thing with Matty Roberts is that there's just almost massive form swings in itself. Obviously, you can take into account the sub games. I think he had 2 green vests and a red vest in there. The only problem I find with that is that it did coincide with 1, McInerney being out of the side. 2, Mills was on the wing. I don't expect Mills to be on the wing next year. I think he's either in the guts or is patrolling at halfback. And 3, it coincided with the Swans losing, I think, 4 or 5 out of the 7 or 6 games that I have highlighted here, where he went 107 in the 6-game run there. I don't think the Swans, if they do that, then I don't think a lot of the Swans will be favourable in Supercoach this year. So I don't expect them to lose 4 out of 6 games. And I think it was also a very tough run in that with Brisbane, Bulldogs, Port, Collingwood, Adelaide and Essendon. And that Adelaide game itself was the biggest no-show I've ever seen. There was just people just kicking back and forth. The last quarter, I think it might have been only about a goal each or something like that. It wasn't a good watch, that last quarter.
Yeah, and we see that sometimes, and that was an interesting point because you brought up about that 24 this year against West Coast that they will have, and yeah, if the Swans are kind of might be in that position again, and maybe the Eagles, it might be some checked out footy there too. So
we always see Geelong against West Coast in the last game there.
Yeah, so we always sit there and say, yeah, if they've got good fixtures, it's good to get on these players. But sometimes it's not if it's too easy of a fixture because, they can sort of have the game in control and then just sort of play bruise-free football. But in the same, that's always can be very good if you've got defenders in your team because they're the ones usually racking up the points, and that's what Roberts managed to do in that last game. So, there's a lot of intrigue about him because if he does sort of put up the performance that he did over those sort of last 8 weeks, he's definitely underpriced. But as you said, there are quite a few variables there. Mills is back in that mix. You've got the Lizard. Jake Lloyd always takes off points. Rampy, when he's fit, always looks good. And there's so many mouths to feed as well. So it's kind of hard to see him racking up that much ball like he did. And it's also, as you said, it's also dependent on if the Swans were probably performing bad, where you're going to obviously get more points into that back line. So, and the big variable then is also Dean Cox. We know Dean Cox loves Roberts. Does he just see him more back at half back for his own development? Does he try to push him up the ground a little bit more too? So these are sort of questions that we don't have answers for at the moment.
Yeah, I think Roberts was even drafted as, I think, a non-baller at one point in his draft year, and it's now was pushed out originally to the wing, didn't look like he'd make it, and then it's just gone to half back. But yeah, like you said, I think it could easily turn into a Port Adelaide scenario where there's 4 or 5 guys there that you're like, I don't know who's going to take it. You've probably got about 450 or so points between 5 guys, and you could easily have 5 guys average 90 or so, and then suddenly there's no value there.
Yeah, for sure. The next one is Callum Mills. Did have a very injury interrupted 2024 with only the 6 games. We know what this guy can do. Every year he looks absolutely super fit. Like the pictures of him are unreal. It's only I have to go back to 2022 where he averaged nearly 117 for the year. It was a bit of a down year also in 2023. But yeah, he used to be one of our premium guys in the midfield. He'll be as hungry as anybody. Obviously missing all that, the majority of the season last year. The downside for me is just the risk of him being that guy who can be a Mr. Fix-It. So again, it all probably depends on what Dean Cox's role for him. If he is in those guts or if he is the main distributor out of half-back, he becomes an extremely interesting target. If he's stuck on the wing or if he's doing jobs again, there's a part of me that thinks you could just easily leave him alone. What are your thoughts about Captain Callum Mills?
I still think no matter where he goes, he'll be valued. I think he's priced 71, 72, give or take, or somewhere around that marker. I still think as a distributor, Mr. Fix-It down back, he'll go 90 or so. But I just don't, it just all depends on if he gets that sort of 50% CBA role. I know that in 2022, he averaged 115 from 56% CBAs. If you look at his 70% CBAs, I believe it's a 104 across 3 or 4 years. So he shows that he can do it. It's just that he could easily just float back in and sort of play that 7th defender, and suddenly, he wouldn't be playing that 7th defender. He'd allow someone like a Nick Blakey to sort of go off the chain there and pick up his man. But if he is playing down back, it kind of negates any upside, I feel like, especially with a lot of the other early buys. I feel like if he wasn't on the early buy, you'd still pick him either way just because he'd have that 15 upside. But with the early buy, it almost wipes away about five or so points in itself, given that they have the one less game, I guess. So, yeah, it all depends on what he puts out in opening round. I guess even if he puts out, say, a 120 off a halfback, you could almost just go and say, I'm going to have him for the first 5-6 weeks. He's going to make money, and then push him off easily to someone like a Whitfield or something off his buy, because I do like the GWS post-buy run.
There is also a part of me that thinks he could be one of those traps because of the round 0 game. We saw it a bit with Grundy last year, came in, was awesome in round 0, probably hit his straps after that sort of round 6 and after he had his bye, but some people had already kind of moved him on by then. But yeah, probably didn't perform as what I think some people were expecting during that initial period. And maybe just because of those first couple games like Brisbane and Fremantle, there is a potential there for Mills to have to do a job if that's how sort of Cox wants them to go, so they can kind of free up their other players in the midfield. And then, maybe you'd kind of want him after the round 3 bye. So I could see I can see a world where, he comes out, scores really well against Hawthorn, poor scores against Brisbane Freo. People get frustrated with him and trade him out. And then he might hit his straps kind of round 4, round 5 and start making cash for those people who are patient with him.
Yeah, I mean, it's all just looking at the Sydney, I guess, midfield as well. Just looking at who's below him as well, because you've only really got at this point with Detoli even going down. Cleary, I don't think they'll put a main midfield role on him at the moment. You've only really got Sheldrick and probably Taylor Adams itself that can take up a big sort of fourth or third midfield role itself. So he sort of could easily just move mid-season.
Yeah, for sure. Moving to the guts now. So I left Isaac Heaney on there, but he obviously deserves to be talked about as well. But you've got the big three in Isaac, Goulden and Warner. In that double time trial, Goulden won one and he came third in another one. So just shows that he's running capacity, and that's why he's such a valuable player for us. And he was, though there was a couple of down games last year, was pretty well a great keeper for those who had him. He has the ability, because of his his ability to run all day, can burn opponents. And even in a couple of games last year where he was kind of poor for 3 quarters, I think it might have even been, say, that Fremantle game where he might have been on like about 20 or 30 at 3/4 time, still has the running capacity to put up a massive score in a quarter, and I think he scored about 60 odd in that 1 quarter there. So he's only going to continue to get better. He'll be a big plan of Sydney's future. But the thing is, he is just a pure midfielder at 581. And then we've got Chad Warner, who is out of contract this year and sort of not anywhere clearer of if he's going to commit to Sydney long term or head back to the Perth sides. But we do know what players do in out of contract years. More often than not, they do have a kind of career year, and we've probably been waiting for Chad, like just a sort of consistency. But when he's on, geez, he can rack off massive scores. We saw last year with the 164 against Collingwood and the 172 against Carlton. And then, what more can you say about Isaac Heaney? Mate, do you want to cover those 3 players?
I think the luxury with the Swans out for themselves and the midfielders, with Heaney and Warner being able to spend that 20% in the forward line, 30% in the forward line, it almost creates, and that fourth on baller goes from that sort of like 40% up to that like 60%. It almost creates an extra role there itself. So I think with Sydney being, you see right here, Heaney, Rowbottom, Warner, then you have almost Mills as that extra one, but it does allow some time for Goulden, even though I don't probably like it as much as, and I think that could be one of the big philosophy changes itself, is Goulden spending 100% on the outside rather than getting those CBAs dropping from, I believe it was in the 30s or so, or 40s, down to sort of that 25 range, 20% range. And you get that extra tough on baller like a Sheldrick or someone like that, or a Caden Cleary getting that extra 15, 20% itself. So you start to get that extra little bit. And I think that's just the interesting part itself, because you're going to have the row bottom workhorse that's going to put a number on other teams. I mean, him and Heaney combined to, I think, shut down Cripps in both of their games. He's done it with other tall arm ballers like Bont and stuff like that. And that's even before you get to the tag master and James Jordan. So I think it really does allow guys like Warner, Goulden, and those sort of outside balls to be able to just outrun their opponents. And I think Goulden, the interesting one, was mid-season. Everyone was talking about, and I know that this coincides almost with that Fremantle game, everyone was talking about, can he get that 100% TOG game? And I think that's almost what sort of burnt him off a little bit for a couple of weeks there. It's just that he had mid-80s lower TOG because he tried to almost get it against that in that Fremantle game. And I mean, just looking here, even he had one kick in it, that Freo game, just because of his absolute workload there. And that would have been the last couple minutes to go in that game to try and win it. So I think Goulden is one that I think if he just tempers down a little bit, is sitting around that 90% TOG, could easily just go back and really improve and get that 6 points that he lost over last year, get it back, maybe even get up towards that 115 marker again. Because I know we did have that Collingwood tag game where Steele really got to him well and held him down to, I think, a 69. So I think that, I mean, we do look at upside games, and then you also look at the 150s and go, maybe that's not going to happen again. But I think with Goulden and his high TOG, I think there's always that opportunity being out there that long.
Yeah, no, and you make a great point. And it's probably not just the Freo game, but a couple of games later in the season, the Essendon and the Adelaide game, where they did kind of rest him through a little bit more. As we said, it was a little bit of bruise-free football in a couple of those games because the Swans were that far clear. So there's no surprise that his top dropped. And then even against the Crows, he still racked up 118, but was only 84 against Essendon, where earlier in the season. And he's a guy that's just absolutely dominated two time trials back to back. He was playing pretty well, anywhere between 95 and pretty well 98% in a couple of those games, and there was no doubt, why he was scoring so massive. So if he is fit and firing, which he is, and it looks brilliant at the moment, there is one Swan premium that you could definitely look at, if not starting off with, but potentially, if you're looking at maybe swapping somebody after their bye, you've probably got a lot of confidence in just how this guy's workload and his consistency in his scoring.
Yeah, I think being the outside player as well as not being as much of an impact player as Warner and sort of Heaney are, I think it's a little bit more worthwhile to put money into him rather than Chad Warner that can slightly go missing in some games.
Yeah, well, the only good thing about the Chad now is we do have the flex, because he has the habit of absolutely putting up an absolute stinker every so often, like he did last year with like the 38 against the Dogs. And he has had a history of that. Like, you go through each season, and there's always like if it's not a 30, there might be a 50 score here or there. So potentially, if you are kind of got him on that back end, or even if you're looking at starting him, that shocking game might actually get taken out just because you've got that flex position. It's not really what you want from a premium guy, but if you want somebody who on any given week as a vice captain option can go next level, he does provide that. So we talked about those massive scores and against good teams too. So it doesn't really matter who the opposition is. The Chad can rack them up. And it's just, it is that contract year. So we already know Sydney and the two Perth teams are chasing him very heavily. From both have tried to stock up with their draft picks in to try to not only to land that financial offer, but to be able to pull it off if they need to from a draft compensation. It's going to be all on Chad. And if you think he's going to, impress the suitors, well, we know they're going to come after him anyway. But if he has a season which could be like not just best and fairest for the Swans, but up there as one of the best midfielders in the league, there might be an extra couple 100,000 on that contract, which it's an incentive for anyone.
Yeah, I think the flex definitely does throw a couple of almost curveballs into it at this point in the season. I mean, do you go that extra sort of impact player like Chad Warner who has that massive ceiling, or do you go with the more probably a little bit consistent, higher ceiling sort of ruckman, third ruckman that could score really, really well in that role?
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I think people were going to be thinking on that, especially when you get after those mid-season buys, when we're trying to probably add that 23rd premium where we've probably had off the bench before, but now we'll actually have them in the flex position. So, a bit to think about there. For the forward line, I've got two rookie kind of players. Well, Caden Cleary has obviously been on the list for a little while, but Jesse Tatoli, who was picked up by the Swans in the draft. What do you want to add about those two young fellas, mate?
I was actually looking back to find out when Tatoli was sort of highlighted as an injury, and it was December 17th, and it was 6 weeks and 4 months 6 weeks with no running and 4 months without footy. If you look at 6 weeks from that point, that's February. And then if you look at 4 months without footy, that's late March, almost April. I suspect they're going to, and I think it almost could be good with him in terms of long term and not so necessarily Supercoach focus, more Swans focus, is that he almost was sort of touted as the Mr. Fix-It in that role. We've had Braden Campbell in that role. I mean, Taylor Adams sort of, Caden Cleary did spend that time in that small forward role. And they do need someone that can tackle, be hard, hardened at the footy there itself to partner with Tom Papley. And I think he is very, very similar in respects to Tom Papley, Jesse Detoli. So I think that they'll feed him through the VFL, and I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a debut till rounds 10, 12, somewhere in that around about the bye region. If Caden isn't probably hitting his straps, I think him or Taylor Adams probably does get that slot. And I think that Cleary having a little bit more leg speed and now for goal, I reckon probably also a little bit cleaner by foot could also get that half forward spot. And that's why I'm a little bit higher than I think most will, but obviously that team list you get, and round 0 we get a look at him. But I think if he gets that non-sub role, being priced at basically basement almost for a second-year player who's basically a midfielder, I think you could see a very Zach Butters, Connor Rosie, pretty much all the forwards that we always get type of result where he just goes through the forward line for a couple of years and we sort of get to see the rise. I think this could be the first year of him as a legitimate forward rookie, and then we'll see how he goes along.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like there was one game where he did have actually there's a couple of games where he did get some good minutes in round 23 and 24, which is kind of what you want to see, because as they're kind of heading into finals, they were giving him opportunity. That Essen game, he did score a 62, so that is promising. Probably wasn't the hugest stat line, but did impact the scoreboard. Still, got the 9 touches and kicked a goal. So for a guy who's at least basement price, we get to hopefully look at. It does give us an option. And as you said with Detoli, we don't want all these rookies starting at the start of the year. We do need downgrade options, and hopefully Detoli's one that does come in mid-year for us, and would be nice to be able to cash out a fattened cow and bring somebody like him in, which he would be perfect because he does have that swing already.
Yeah, I do think with Detoli, the good thing is that it was only a stress reaction. It wasn't actually a full-on stress fracture. So I think they are being a little bit more careful with him and sort of going to feed him through at this point. But yeah, there definitely is that, like I said, with that midfielder being Heaney and Warner being more forward threats, I think it opens up a 20% CBA role that Cleary potentially gets. And if you're looking at the current forward rookies, we always say this about sort of small forwards that they generally don't do well. But if you add a 10 to 15% potential CBA role for Cleary, I think that could be almost one of the best ones in the comp at the moment, to be that sort of FA.
Yeah, for sure. Or another rookie price player there, well, slightly a little bit more expensive than the basement rookie, is Angus Sheldrick. You've mentioned him a few times too. So again, a bit like Roberts, has been on that list for a couple of years before sort of Roberts got in and broke out in with his opportunity, is a contested ball winning midfielder. So I think players like him and Cleary, who you've mentioned, if there was an injury early on to the Swans, that does open the door for these sort of guys to come in, and somebody for us to look at if there is a long-term injury for the Swans.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting because obviously you have that team list up there, and if Horse was to go back through another year, if he wasn't to hang it up, I would fully expect the team list exactly like that. But I'm just wondering, and Swan supporters and any other supporter in the league is none the wiser with what is who are Cox's favourite outside of probably Matty Roberts at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if he does something, maybe even drops a Hayden McLean or a Joel Amati to go small. I mean, just remembering his first press conference, his first words basically were way of defending and contest, and then he followed it up with speed. So whether it means, and he also mentioned like attacking tweaks and contested method. So those sort of all align to someone like a Cleary, Detoli himself, if he was fit, or a Angus Sheldrick coming into that side over someone like an Adams or just looking here quickly, someone like a Lloyd or a Florent or something like that, being the guy that drops out, because they do have quite a few halfback flankers and wingers. And if you can get that extra small forward role or a on-baller, that 20%, 40% on-baller, that fourth on-baller, that's where it is probably the difference between the Swans having something else to be able to chuck out at that grand finals. It felt like they didn't really have any other midfielder to really combat Brisbane.
Yeah, for sure. The only other guy I've got off my list there, which I haven't mentioned but deserves a mention, is Brodie Grundy. This time last year, he was the real hype player. So probably didn't start off as well as we probably wanted after that Melbourne game, which didn't obviously count for us super coaches, when he had the 71, 99, 114 and 93, but then really hit his straps after the bye. There were scores of 158, 143, 153, 154 in that period, and then it did drop off at the end of the year. A little bit, I think, man management, because if you see his time on ground, it did massively drop off in those sort of last 4 rounds. So I think they were just trying to get him through for the finals, and also they were trying to give him a little bit more support at that time, where you had the sort of second ruckman chopping him out a lot more than what was probably previously happening, when the Swans were obviously trying to get those early wins and banking. So a bit of man management. So I think for those who had him early in the year, and you kind of look up to about sort of round 18, he was still averaging 113.7. So there it's like one of the premium ruckman scores, but yeah, ends up finishing with a 106 because of that time on ground. I don't see him being talked about as much this year because the hype has dropped, and I think because a few people got burnt, but definitely underpriced to what he can perform.
Yeah, I think so. I think it will also be interesting with who does Dean Cox himself like as that secondary ruck. I mean, there's been definitely talks about dropping it all itself, from whether they drop the backup ruckman in McLean, whether they drop Amadi himself, even though he was the leading goal scorer, do they bring in a Laddams or something like that? And if they do, how does that sort of ruck mix sort of go? And I don't think you can really go to Brodie Grundy, even though there was that upside initially, just because I feel like there will be management there, whether it be in-game or whether it be maybe even a rest week against someone like a Richmond or something like that, where you can just give Laddams the keys in that week.
Yeah, I think so. He's not a bad one. Like I think those who wanting to start, say, a Shrek or a DeConning, and sort of because of the high upside of both of those players, but we do know both, especially Shrek has been injury prone for a long time. DeConning can potentially find himself sharing the rock against with Pitternet if they want the bigger body in certain matchups. So if neither of them worked out in that sort of first 3 rounds, you definitely could go to like a Grundy as a more safer, reliable person. I've got no issue with that. I think, at least then you would have those 3-game sample size to see. Well, it'd actually be 4 with their bye. So, 3 from them, and then 4 rounds of having a look at the other player, just to see what they've done with that second ruck and see sort of how their lineup's going. So I agree with you. I think it's interesting. I wouldn't be probably starting Grundy, but it's at his price. If he's sort of averaging, looks like he's going to be averaging 110 again and has good minutes, you could definitely do a side swap there.
Yeah, I think so. I think also just looking at the fixture here, Collingwood in round 5 is a little bit of a ruck minefield, I guess. But it could be interesting if they go with a one ruck or 2 ruck set up there with Cox as their secondary, because Brodie definitely did struggle in the 2 games last year against the Collingwood double ruck.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody else from the Sydney Swans you'd like to discuss there, mate?
I think Bice, I think I've seen him a little bit more than I probably would have thought early season. I think it is basically just because he is a mature ager that they probably like he's a couple years further down the line than a lot of the other defenders. So I think he's probably a little bit higher up than he would be, but I still think just looking at this this team list you've got, he would even be behind Campbell himself as a halfback flanker probably in that system, and I think he's a good little bit behind. I could obviously be wrong with that decision there, and Cox could be absolutely loving him, but I think he's one that is a couple injuries back from actually starting at this point.
Yep, no, I think that's fair. And it's usually like, I think with the Swans too, last year, especially in the up to the bye, they've by far had the smallest rotation of players than any other club. So it'd be interesting to see if Cox has a kind of a different view on that and wants to, in certain games, freshen players up, because it was all in with the kind of the squad that Longmire liked, especially up to that bye. So I think they'd only kind of used 27 players up to maybe around 11 or something ridiculous like that. And then we sort of noticed that what season went on, they did cop a few more injuries and, had to start using their list a bit more. But yeah, we know man management of the squad is highly important, and the Swans do have plenty of depth. So it'd be interesting to see how Cox manages that.
Yeah, it certainly will be. I think a couple of the role changes as well. We saw Wicks down back for a good couple of weeks in the preseason. That will be interesting. I think he's going to be moulded into that Cunningham role, which probably doesn't give much Supercoach relevance, but I think it does also show that there is more openness in that half forwards flank role that we've said multiple times. Cleary, Dottoli, Adams, Braden Campbell, they're all looking at that. And I think also another guy that he's been injury prone pretty much since he was picked up in the mid-season in 2022 or 2023 now, was actually Jack Buller. And I think he could be that type of chop out for Hayden McLean. Hayden McLean isn't the, I guess you would say, quickest player out there. I think there are definitely a lot of quicker players out there. And I think that Buller, just with his frame, it naturally is around the same as McLean, and I think he's a little bit quicker and a little bit more of a contested mark. So if they want that sort of to go to that two-man forward system, I think he's probably a guy that they could potentially look at bringing in to partner alongside McDonald, I would think.
Yep, no, I agree with that. Beautiful. I think that does it for the Sydney Swans. Kai, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Swiss.
And if you haven't already, check out Kai's channel, doing some great job on the KB Sports Fantasy Podcast, and is very active on Twitter. So, definitely sign up, subscribe, and same with us. Thank you, guys. We'll be moving on to our next team discussion, and we'll tune in soon. Bye, guys.